My name is Brynn Calloway. I am 65. I have lived most of my life carefully, measuring steps, choices, and words, believing that independence and clarity were shields against disappointment. That morning, I was sipping my chamomile tea in the quiet kitchen of my Portland apartment, the soft hum of traffic drifting through the open window, when my phone buzzed insistently on the counter. It was a message from Madison. I had a sense of the tone before opening it, the kind of authority a child might wield after years of expecting compliance. Her text was curt, gleaming with precision. Flights are $1,000 each. Guess that's out of your budget. The words hit me like a cold gust of wind through a cracked window. Out of my budget? My budget. After decades of managing my life and finances, after years of making careful, deliberate choices, I felt an unfamiliar mixture of shock and hurt. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and simply nodded at the message as if acknowledging an absurd, invisible truth. Minutes later, another vibration announced a more tangible betrayal. My bank app flashed a notice: 4 business class tickets charged to my credit card. 4 business class tickets had been charged to my card, totaling $18,000. The numbers made my hands tremble. Every careful calculation, every plan to maintain my autonomy, felt suddenly at risk, threatened by the audacity of someone who should have known better. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my lips together, my mind racing through all the ways I could respond. There was anger, yes, but also a cold, precise clarity that came from years of managing crises, personal and financial alike. I opened the app, disputed the charges, and locked the account with a few deliberate taps. Each action was a small assertion of control, a counterbalance to the audacity of betrayal. And yet, the tension had only begun to coil tighter around me. Madison, fully aware of the shock she had caused, had plans beyond mere financial humiliation. I felt the shift in the air, the unmistakable signal that she would follow through on her next move. I could hear it in the silent pause between the buzz of notifications and the faint hum of the city outside. Confrontation was coming. I set my phone aside and stood, running a hand through my silver hair, and walked toward the living room window. Portland spread out beneath the early morning light, calm and indifferent. I drew in a slow breath, steadying myself, knowing that the next hours would require every ounce of patience and resolve I had cultivated over 65 years. The stage for the reckoning had been set, and there would be no retreat. From that quiet vantage point, I began tracing the contours of what had led us here, thinking back to every decision, every boundary, every unspoken rule. The past would inform the next steps, and I could feel that the confrontation was only the beginning. I have always been careful with money, not because I am miserly, but because I have learned, through a lifetime of observation, that money can be wielded as a weapon even by those who claim to love you. My daughter, Madison, had inherited my sharp mind, and with it, a keen sense of family power dynamics that had defined our family for generations. I thought I had prepared myself, yet her message this morning had reminded me just how easily old patterns could surface. Growing up, financial conversations in our household were never straightforward. My parents presented a picture of stability, luxury, and social polish. Yet beneath the surface, every decision was a test of obedience. Loans and gifts were often veiled as generosity, but the price of acceptance was invisible and exacting. I had watched cousins and siblings caught in the invisible net, their choices constantly measured against arbitrary expectations. It taught me early that clarity and documentation were as essential as trust. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned to protect myself quietly. I maintained separate accounts, never co-signed loans without careful consideration, and kept a ledger of any financial assistance I offered. Even small gifts were carefully calculated within my personal budget. The lessons were not born of paranoia, but of necessity. It was one thing to manage my own resources. It was another to navigate the invisible obligations imposed by family, where a well-intentioned smile could conceal coercion. Over the years, I had become skilled at recognizing manipulation before it could take hold. I had seen how my daughter, sharp and ambitious, could mimic the same tactics I had endured, sometimes consciously, sometimes unknowingly. Even as I built my independence, I had to remain vigilant, balancing love with discernment, generosity with caution. Sitting by the kitchen window, I thought about the countless occasions when I had to assert boundaries, politely but firmly. Lending money to relatives had always required documentation. Offers to help were accompanied by clearly stated terms. I had learned that autonomy was not negotiable, even when family insisted otherwise. And yet, the sight of those unauthorized charges this morning reminded me that vigilance is never truly complete, that the patterns of family, both seen and hidden, have a way of resurfacing at the most inconvenient moments. I had just set my teacup down when my phone buzzed again, an insistent vibration that made my chest tighten. At first, I assumed it was another reminder about a routine appointment or a message from my bank confirming a payment I had made. But when I unlocked the screen, my heart sank. 4 separate notifications blinked at me in rapid succession. 4 business-class tickets had just been charged to my credit card. The total came to $18,000, all for flights I had never approved. A wave of disbelief washed over me, followed quickly by a sharp sting of betrayal. My daughter, Madison, had humiliated me with words only moments before, and now she had crossed into the territory of actions. The insult had been verbal, cold, and cutting, but this was tangible, immediate, and devastating. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details, confirming names, dates, and amounts. Each line felt like a betrayal carved into numbers on a screen. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my breath, and the memories of past family manipulations flickered through my mind. The careful boundaries I had established over decades, the separate accounts, the meticulous planning to protect my independence, all of it seemed threatened in an instant. Yet, beneath the shock, a thread of clarity began to form. I had faced manipulation before, and I had learned how to respond. This would not unravel me. I opened the banking app and disputed each charge with deliberate care. As I tapped through the steps, locking my account and initiating alerts to prevent further unauthorized activity, my anger began to solidify into focus. This was more than just a financial violation. It was a test of my resolve, a challenge to the autonomy I had fought so hard to maintain. The betrayal was personal, yes, but my response would be methodical, measured, and unwavering. Even as I completed the final steps to secure my finances, I could not quell the mix of emotions roiling inside me. There was shock, humiliation, and disbelief, but also a rising current of determination. Madison had assumed she could manipulate and control, but she had underestimated the woman she was dealing with, a 65-year-old who had spent her life understanding the subtle currents of power, control, and consequence. I closed the app and pressed my palms against my temples, trying to calm the adrenaline that made my vision blur slightly. The room was silent, but the tension was suffocating. I knew that the confrontation, when it came, would require every ounce of composure and resolve I had cultivated over a lifetime. For now, all I could do was breathe, steady myself, and prepare for what would inevitably follow. The breach of trust had been made, and there was no turning back. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of $18,000 pressing down like a physical burden. My mind raced, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Panic would not serve me now. I had always believed that clarity and preparation were the most powerful defenses against chaos. and I intended to apply both. The first step was obvious: dispute the charges. I navigated the banking app with practiced precision, entering details of the unauthorized purchases. Each ticket, each date, each business class seat was meticulously documented. My fingers hovered over the final confirmation before pressing submit, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was no longer an abstract insult. This was a concrete violation of trust. I moved quickly to lock the card, ensuring that no further charges could compound the betrayal. I double-checked my other accounts, changing passwords and setting alerts, creating layers of security that would make any future attempts impossible. Even as my rational mind organized these steps, my emotions roiled beneath the surface. There was anger at the audacity of the act, a sharp sting of humiliation, and yet, underneath it all, a deep, unwavering determination. I began compiling evidence, screenshots of the charges, timestamps of messages, notes on each action taken. If this escalated further, if Madison attempted to manipulate the narrative, or if others were drawn into justifying her behavior, I would have a record. Each note, each screenshot, each step in the process was an assertion of my agency. I was no longer merely reacting. I was taking control. Even with the adrenaline fading slightly, fear lingered in the edges of my mind. The thought of Madison arriving at my apartment, of family backlash, loomed like a shadow. Yet fear was not my master. Anger gave way to clarity, and clarity reinforced resolve. I had spent 65 years learning to protect myself, to anticipate manipulation, and to assert boundaries without apology. Now, I was putting every lesson into action. I pressed a final confirmation in the app, leaning back with a slow exhale. The charges were disputed, the card locked, and the documentation organized. I sat for a long moment, feeling the tension drain just enough to think, but not enough to forget. Madison had tested me, but I had met her challenge. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but at least now, I would face it on my terms. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. Yet, within me, a storm had settled into a steady current of resolve. Whatever came next, I would stand firm, fully aware of the consequences and fully in command of my actions. By mid-afternoon, the air in my Portland apartment felt heavy, charged with anticipation. Madison had arrived, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if expecting me to crumble at any moment. She did not wait for pleasantries. "Brynn, you cannot just refuse to pay for this trip," she said, voice smooth but edged with accusation. "Everyone is counting on you. It is about the family." I met her gaze evenly, aware of the subtle tension that accompanied her words. This was not merely about flights. It was about control, about testing whether I would yield to the invisible rules she had internalized from our family's long history of financial games. My fingers rested on my phone in my pocket, recording. Each tap a small assertion of my own authority. Within minutes, other family members began to appear. James, my son-in-law, arrived with a forced smile, holding a stack of itineraries. My Aunt Carolyn hovered near the doorway, her presence a mix of concern and silent judgment. Even cousins Travis and Jessica drifted in, some with curiosity, others with quiet apprehension. Madison stepped forward, positioning herself almost theatrically between me and the others. Her arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not just about money, Brynn," Madison continued, a practiced air of sincerity in her tone. "It is about trust. You agreed to help. You promised." Her eyes flicked to the others, silently invoking their confirmation. I did not flinch. I did not agree. I said evenly, "I never promised. You acted without my permission." The room shifted subtly, the weight of past patterns pressing down. Gaslighting, a familiar strategy in this family, began to ripple through the conversation. We all thought you wanted to participate, Aunt Carolyn said, her voice calm but insistent. Madison reminded you in the group chat. I held her gaze steadily. I never confirmed payment for these tickets. Any claims otherwise are inaccurate. Madison's composure wavered for a fraction of a second before she masked it with indignation. You make everything difficult. You always have, she said. Even now, after everything, you refuse to support the family. Is your independence more important than us? I pressed a hand to my pocket, feeling the phone beneath my fingers, recording everything. The device was my anchor, a tangible way to assert control amidst the swirling accusations. My voice remained calm. Independence does not negate responsibility, but it does require consent. You acted without mine. That is the boundary I have maintained for decades, and it will not change now. The tension thickened as voices rose in tandem, some sympathetic to Madison, others questioning her actions. Past grievances surfaced, the long history of manipulation and expectation threading through every exchange. Yet I did not flinch, did not raise my voice. Each claim was met with measured facts. Each accusation countered with clear recollection. By the time the confrontation had reached its apex, I could feel the energy in the room shifting. Some realized the pattern of behavior, the deliberate testing of boundaries, and the audacity of assuming compliance. I exhaled slowly, the camera of my phone capturing the subtle shifts in expression, the fleeting hesitations, and the truth I had long sought to assert my autonomy was neither negotiable nor optional. After the confrontation, I sat in my living room, the weight of what had transpired pressing down on me. The adrenaline from facing Madison and the family still pulsed in my veins, but now, clarity took over. This was no longer only a test of patience or composure. It had become a matter of legality and protection. I needed to act decisively. First, I called my bank. The representative listened as I explained the unauthorized charges, totaling $18,000 for 4 business-class tickets. I could hear the concern in her voice as she confirmed that the transactions were flagged and would be investigated. She guided me through freezing the account to prevent any additional unauthorized charges and initiating a formal dispute for each ticket. I took careful notes of each reference number, each timestamp, documenting everything meticulously. Next, I reached out to a fraud specialist I had been recommended by a colleague. Alicia reviewed the situation with precision, asking detailed questions about my accounts, recent activity, and who had access to my personal information. She explained that family-based financial abuse was surprisingly common and emphasized the importance of establishing formal documentation to protect myself. Together, we implemented additional security measures, 2-factor authentication on all financial platforms, detailed alerts for future transactions, and monitoring across all 3 major credit bureaus. Finally, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and financial abuse cases. Erica's office was calm and methodical, a stark contrast to the storm of emotion I had endured earlier. She explained my options: a formal cease and desist letter to Madison and any other family members involved, criminal reporting if necessary, and preparation of an evidence record should legal proceedings become unavoidable. I felt a measure of relief as Erica outlined a step-by-step plan, giving me a tangible framework to reclaim control. By the end of the afternoon, I had sent formal notifications, secured my accounts, and prepared legal letters. Every action reinforced my autonomy and established clear boundaries that could not be ignored or dismissed. The steps were methodical, each one a calculated move to prevent further violations. Sitting back in my chair, I allowed myself a deep breath. The immediate danger had been mitigated, but the awareness of how easily trust could be violated lingered. I had acted swiftly, firmly, and effectively, transforming my shock and anger into protective measures. This was a different kind of empowerment, one rooted in action and foresight, ensuring that betrayal, no matter how close it came, could no longer take me unprepared. The apartment was quiet now, the city humming softly outside the window, but inside, my thoughts raced like an untamed current. I had secured my finances, locked the account, and consulted both specialists and a lawyer. Yet even as the practical measures settled, the emotional weight of betrayal pressed heavily on my chest. Madison's audacity, the extended family's complicity, and the repeated patterns of manipulation were not merely financial, they were personal. I poured myself a cup of tea, trying to anchor my thoughts. The sting of humiliation lingered, a dull ache that reminded me of years spent navigating similar currents of control and expectation. Therapy had been a sanctuary in the past, a place to untangle the invisible threads of obligation, guilt, and loyalty that had been woven into my life since childhood. I called Dr. Winters, arranging a session for the following morning. Speaking aloud to someone who understood the mechanisms of familial manipulation always helped me sift through anger, fear, and lingering doubt. During our session, I traced each step of the morning's events, the unauthorized charges, and the confrontation with Madison in meticulous detail. Dr. Winters encouraged me to acknowledge the betrayal without minimizing it, to allow myself both the shock and the pride in standing firm. He reminded me that independence carries both freedom and responsibility, and that maintaining boundaries is a practice, not a single act. I thought about resilience, a quality I had cultivated over decades. Each confrontation, each boundary asserted, had strengthened my capacity to respond rather than react. The anger and sadness were natural, but they did not define me. Instead, they were markers of the stakes involved of the autonomy I had fought to preserve. As the session ended, I felt a subtle shift within me. The emotional fog had lifted slightly, replaced by a steadier clarity. I was not powerless, nor was I isolated. I had allies, resources, and a clear plan to navigate the fallout. Healing, I realized, was not about forgetting the betrayal, but integrating the lessons it brought. It was about reinforcing the structures, both practical and emotional, that would protect me in the future. I ended the call with a deep exhale. Leaning back in my chair, the apartment felt lighter, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to envision moving forward, calm, deliberate, and ready to engage with the world on my own terms. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the turbulence had quieted. My accounts were secure, alerts in place, and every unauthorized transaction disputed. The weight of $18,000 had lifted, replaced by a steady sense of control. I began volunteering with a local community center, teaching adults and teens how to manage their finances, to recognize manipulation, and to assert boundaries, sharing lessons forged from my own experience. Family interactions shifted as well. I limited contact to those who respected my autonomy, allowing honest, mutual connections to grow while letting toxic patterns fade. Madison reached out cautiously, but I maintained the boundaries I had learned to enforce. Each conversation became measured, deliberate, and guided by respect rather than fear or obligation. Sitting at my kitchen table one morning, reviewing lesson plans for a financial literacy class, I realized how far I had come. The storm of betrayal, manipulation, and violation had left me stronger, more self-assured, and profoundly aware of my own limits. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My independence was intact, my judgment trusted, and my dignity reclaimed. The apartment felt lighter, quieter, yet full of purpose. Peace had settled into the space once occupied by fear, and with it, the knowledge that self-respect could coexist with compassion. I had protected what was mine, faced betrayal without capitulation, and emerged with clarity and calm. The past could no longer control me. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly free.